The room is silent except for the slow hum of electricity. Screens glow in the dark. Somewhere in the world, a server processes a human decision into data. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a completely different kind of machine was described in secret texts buried in desert sand. Not a computer, not a network, but a world engine, a system built by a lesser god, a god who did not understand what it created. The ancient Gnostics claimed something heretical. The creator of this world was not the true God. He was an architect of limitation, a ruler of ignorance, a being who built a reality powerful enough to trap souls, but not wise enough to understand them. Today, physicists speak of simulations, of coded universes, of reality as computation, and the ancient question returns with new urgency. If this world is a system, who designed it? And why can't we leave? For most of human history, the universe made sense, not because people understood it completely, but because they had frameworks, stories that answered the fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What governs the stars, the seasons, the rise and fall of empires? In ancient Greece, Plato offered an answer that would echo through millennia. He described a realm of perfect forms, eternal, unchanging blueprints for everything that exists. The physical world was merely a shadow of this higher reality, a cave wall upon which flickering images danced. But even in this imperfect realm there was order, there was purpose. The demiurge, as Plato called the craftsman god in his dialogue Timaeus, was a benevolent architect who gazed upon the eternal forms and fashioned the cosmos in their image. This creator was good. This creator was wise. The world, despite its flaws, was the best possible copy of perfection that matter could sustain. In the ancient Near East, the Hebrew Bible offered a different but equally coherent vision. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, not from pre-existing materials, not from chaos that needed ordering, but from nothing, ex nihilo. This God was omnipotent, omniscient, and fundamentally good. When he looked upon his creation, he saw that it was good. Humanity was made in his image, granted dominion over the earth, placed in a garden of abundance. The suffering that entered the world came not from a flaw in creation itself, but from human choice, from disobedience, from the desire to be like God. The Stoics too had their cosmic order. They envisioned the universe as a living organism, permeated by logos, divine reason, the rational principle that governed all things. Every event, every particle of matter, every human action was part of an intricate web of cause and effect, predetermined and perfect. To live well meant to align oneself with this cosmic rationality, to accept one's fate with equanimity. The universe was not hostile, it was not indifferent, it was intelligent, purposeful, and fundamentally just. In Egypt, Ma'at represented the fundamental order of the universe: truth, balance, cosmic harmony. The pharaoh's role was to maintain Ma'at, to prevent the world from sliding back into the primordial chaos that existed before creation. The gods themselves were subject to Ma'at. The universe had laws, structure, meaning. These worldviews shared a common assumption. The creator was either perfectly good, perfectly wise, or both. The universe might contain suffering, but that suffering could be explained, rationalized, fit into a larger narrative of deities, testing, or cosmic necessity. The architecture of reality might be mysterious, but it was not malevolent. By the time the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean world, religious and philosophical authority had consolidated around these positive cosmologies. The Romans were particularly pragmatic about religion. They absorbed the gods of conquered peoples, created syncretic cults, and maintained elaborate state rituals, not necessarily because they believed in their literal truth, but because religion served a social function. It maintained order. It legitimized political power. It gave the masses meaning and the elite control. The danger of unauthorized metaphysics was clear to Roman authorities. Alternative cosmologies could destabilize the social order. If people began questioning the fundamental goodness of creation, the legitimacy of earthly power structures, which claim to mirror divine order, would crumble. Mystery cults were tolerated as long as they didn't challenge political authority. But sects that preached radical discontinuity between this world and ultimate reality, that suggested the creator of this world was not the supreme God, or that promised liberation from the cosmic order itself, these were existentially threatening. And yet in the margins of the empire such sects were forming. In Alexandria and Syria, in communities scattered across the Roman world, certain teachers were offering a cosmology so radical, so disturbing, that it would be systematically suppressed for nearly 2,000 years. December 1945. A peasant farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. His shovel struck something solid, a large earthenware jar sealed and buried in the sand. His first thought was fear. In local folklore, such jars could contain jinn, malevolent spirits that might curse whoever released them. But desperation won out. He smashed the jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus books, codices written in Coptic, the language of Egyptian Christians in the early centuries of the Common Era. Muhammad Ali could not read them. He brought them home, where his mother used some of the pages to kindle fire. The remaining codices eventually made their way through antiquities dealers to scholars who recognized their staggering significance. These were Christian texts, but not the Christianity of the Roman Church. These were documents from a suppressed tradition buried sometime in the 4th century, when Orthodox Christianity was solidifying its doctrines and systematically destroying alternatives. The Nag Hammadi library contained 52 texts, many of which had been known only through the hostile descriptions of their opponents. Among the most significant were the Apocryphon of John, a revelation dialogue in which the risen Christ explains the true nature of reality to his disciple John, the hypostasis of the archons, which describes the origin and nature of the hostile cosmic powers that rule this world, and the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus that contains no narrative of crucifixion or resurrection, only cryptic wisdom teachings about the nature of the self and reality. Reading these texts, scholars encountered a cosmology that inverted nearly everything familiar about Christian theology. These texts spoke of a true God far beyond this world, utterly transcendent and unknowable. They spoke of a catastrophic error that led to the creation of the material universe. They spoke of humanity as divine sparks trapped in flesh, imprisoned in a cosmos designed to keep them ignorant of their true nature. And most shocking of all, they spoke of the creator of this world, the God of Genesis, the architect of matter and time, as a false god, an ignorant tyrant who believed himself supreme but was merely a pale shadow of true divinity. Why were these texts hidden? Because by the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. The boundaries of orthodoxy were being drawn with increasing rigidity. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE established core doctrines that all Christians must accept. Texts that contradicted these doctrines were not merely wrong, they were dangerous. They had to be destroyed. The monks who buried the Nag Hammadi library were likely preserving texts they valued but could no longer safely possess. Perhaps they hoped that someday, when the climate of persecution had passed, these books could be recovered. They could not have imagined that 16 centuries would pass before their library saw daylight again. What accusation did these texts level against the Creator? The charge was both simple and devastating. The God who made this world is not the ultimate God. He is an inferior being, born from a cosmic error, who created the material universe as a prison to trap and feed upon the divine light within human beings. He is the demiurge, and he must be escaped, not worshipped. The word demiurge first appears in Plato's Timaeus, written around 360 BCE. In Plato's cosmology, the demiurge is not evil. He is a craftsman god, a divine artisan who looks upon the eternal forms and fashions the physical universe in their image. He is limited. He works with pre-existing matter, and matter resists perfect ordering. But his intentions are entirely benevolent. He wants to make the world as good as it can possibly be. The physical universe, according to Plato, is inherently inferior to the realm of forms, but it is the best possible version of itself. The demiurge is constrained by necessity, by the limitations of matter, but he is not malevolent. For Plato, the demiurge was an answer to a philosophical problem. How can an eternal, perfect, unchanging reality give rise to a temporal, imperfect, changing world? The demiurge served as an intermediary, a being who could bridge the gap between the transcendent and the material. But in the hands of the Gnostics, the demiurge underwent a radical transformation. He retained his role as creator of the material world, but now that role was inverted. The material world was not an imperfect copy of perfection. It was a trap, a prison, a system designed to keep souls ignorant and enslaved. And the demiurge was not a benevolent craftsman, but an arrogant, ignorant tyrant. In the Apocryphon of John, the demiurge is given a name, Yaldabaoth. The etymology is disputed, but it may derive from Aramaic or Hebrew roots meaning child of chaos, or begetter of Sabaoth. Yaldabaoth is described as a lion-faced serpent, a monstrous being who emerges from Sophia, wisdom, one of the divine emanations from the true God. Sophia, in her desire to create without her consort, produces Yaldabaoth as a flawed offspring. He is born outside the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. He does not know his mother. He does not know the true God. Looking around and seeing no other powers, he declares, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me." This line is a direct echo of the God of the Hebrew Bible, who declares in Isaiah, "I am the Lord, and there is no other." But in the Gnostic reinterpretation, this declaration is not a statement of fact. It is an expression of ignorance and arrogance. Yaldabaoth is a false god who mistakes his limited domain for the entirety of reality. Yaldabaoth then creates the material universe. He fashions the heavens, the earth, systems of time and fate. He creates the archons, subordinate rulers who govern the cosmic spheres, the planets, the zodiac. Together, Yaldabaoth and the archons construct a vast machinery of control, a hierarchical system designed to keep souls trapped in matter, cycling through birth and death, never remembering their true origin in the pleroma. The structure of the Gnostic simulation was beginning to take shape. And what emerged was not a theology, it was a systems analysis of reality itself. At the top of the Gnostic cosmology is the pleroma, the fullness, the totality of divine reality. This is not a place. It is not a realm in any spatial sense. It is pure being, pure consciousness, pure light. It is utterly transcendent beyond all categories of thought, beyond existence and non-existence, beyond being and non-being. The true God dwells in the pleroma, though even to say dwells is to impose a limitation that does not apply. From this true God emanations proceed divine attributes or aspects, often personified as aeons. These include mind, truth, word, life, and wisdom, Sophia. Each emanation is an expression of the divine fullness, a facet of ultimate reality. They exist in perfect harmony, in eternal contemplation of the source from which they derive. But Sophia, the youngest of the aeons, makes a catastrophic error. Filled with desire to know the Father directly without her consort, she attempts to create on her own. This act of unbalanced creation produces a rupture. From Sophia's misguided desire emerges Yaldabaoth, ignorant, malformed and separated from the pleroma. Yaldabaoth, unaware of the true God, believes himself supreme. He gazes into the void and begins to create. But his creation is a shadow, a distortion. He cannot access the pleroma, so he works with what he has: chaos, darkness, formlessness. He imposes structure on this chaos, creating the material cosmos. The material universe, according to the Gnostics, is fundamentally flawed. It is not that matter is evil in a moral sense, but that it is inferior, dense, forgetful. Matter resists consciousness. It decays. It suffers entropy. It is subject to time, to causality, to necessity. The material world is a prison not because it contains cells and bars, but because it is structured to induce amnesia, to keep souls ignorant of their divine origin. Yaldabaoth creates the Archons to help him maintain this system. The Archons are often associated with the 7 classical planets: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and with the 12 signs of the zodiac. They are not metaphors. In the Gnostic view, these cosmic powers are real intelligences, regulatory forces that govern fate, biology, and the cycles of reincarnation. Each Archon controls a sphere of existence. They weave the threads of fate, binding souls to predetermined patterns. They regulate the passions, the appetites, the fears that keep human beings identified with their bodies and personalities. They ensure that souls, upon death, do not escape the system but are recycled back into new bodies, their memories wiped, their divine knowledge suppressed. Humanity, in this cosmology, is a hybrid. Yaldabaoth creates the human body, fashioning it in imitation of the divine image he glimpsed reflected in the waters of chaos. But the body is lifeless, until Sophia, in an act of compassion, breathes into it a spark of divine light, a fragment of the pleroma itself. This spark is the true self, the pneuma, the spirit. It is trapped in flesh, imprisoned in a cosmos designed to keep it asleep. The tragedy of human existence, according to the Gnostics, is that we are gods who have forgotten we are gods. We identify with the body, with the personality, with the roles and narratives imposed by the Archons. We mistake the prison for reality. We worship the jailer as God. And here, the ancient language begins to sound disturbingly modern, when the Gnostics speak of the material world as a system of control, as a hierarchical structure that processes souls through predetermined patterns, as a reality governed by the mathematical laws and astrological necessities. They are describing something that sounds less like ancient mythology and more like a computer simulation. Nature, in most ancient cosmologies, was a gift. The fertile earth, the cycles of the seasons, the abundance of life. These were signs of divine benevolence. Even in traditions that emphasize the suffering of existence, like early Buddhism, nature itself was not evil. It was simply the field in which karma played out, the stage upon which the drama of attachment and liberation unfolded. But the Gnostics saw nature differently. Nature was not a gift. It was a mechanism of control. Consider the biological imperatives that govern human life: hunger, thirst, sexual desire, the fear of death. These are not neutral drives. They are chains that bind consciousness to matter. They ensure that human beings remain focused on survival, on reproduction, on the continuation of the species, rather than on awakening to their true nature. Fate, in the Gnostic view, was not the benevolent providence of a loving God. It was Haimamen, cosmic determinism, the iron law of necessity imposed by the Archons. The movements of the planets, the configurations of the zodiac, the moment of one's birth, these determined one's character, one's destiny, one's path through life. Astrology was not a parlor game. It was the user interface of the control system, the visible manifestation of the Archon's power. The Gnostics rejected the idea that obedience to natural law was a virtue. The Stoics counselled acceptance of fate, alignment with cosmic reason. The Gnostics counselled rebellion. To accept one's fate was to accept one's imprisonment. To align with cosmic reason was to align with the demiurge's system. True wisdom meant recognizing that the laws governing this world were not ultimate, that they could be transcended, that the system itself could be escaped. This made Gnosticism profoundly dangerous to the Roman order. Rome depended on hierarchy, on obedience to natural and social law, on the idea that the cosmic order and the political order mirrored each other. If the cosmos itself was a prison, if the gods were jailers, if the law was a mechanism of enslavement, then all earthly authority was called into question. The Gnostic teachings also inverted the meaning of sin and virtue. In Orthodox Christianity, sin was disobedience to God's commands. Virtue was obedience. But in Gnosticism, obedience to the demiurge was the ultimate sin. It was complicity in one's own imprisonment. The serpent in the Garden of Eden, who offered Adam and Eve the knowledge of good and evil, was not a tempter but a liberator. The God who forbade knowledge, who punished curiosity, who demanded blind obedience, this was Yaldabaoth, the false goal. The goal of Gnostic practice was gnosis, direct, experiential knowledge of one's divine nature. This was not intellectual knowledge, not belief, not faith. It was awakening, a sudden realization that shattered the illusion of the material world. Those who attained gnosis were no longer bound by fate. They were no longer subject to the archons. They had seen through the system. But gnosis was dangerous. It destabilized identity. It severed the bonds that held communities together. It made people ungovernable. And so Rome identified this worldview as existentially threatening. The campaign against Gnosticism began in earnest in the 2nd century CE. The weapons were not primarily political or military. They were textual and theological. The Church Fathers understood that to defeat Gnosticism, they had to control the narrative. They had to define orthodoxy so clearly, so authoritatively, that alternative interpretations of Christianity would be rendered not just wrong, but unthinkable. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 CE, produced a massive treatise titled Against Heresies. It was a systematic refutation of Gnostic teachings, but more than that, it was an exercise in boundary drawing. Irenaeus established what would become the orthodox Christian position. There is one God, who is both the creator of the material world and the Father of Jesus Christ. The material world, though fallen, is fundamentally good. Salvation comes through faith in Christ's death and resurrection, not through secret knowledge. The Church, with its apostolic succession and its emerging canon of Scripture, is the sole guardian of truth. Irenaeus portrayed the Gnostics as deluded, as arrogant, as victims of demonic deception. He caricatured their cosmologies, reducing complex mythologies to absurdities. He quoted their texts selectively, out of context, making them appear ridiculous. And crucially, he associated Gnosticism with moral libertinism, claiming that because Gnostics believed the material world was irrelevant, they felt free to indulge in every vice. This was largely slander. Most Gnostic sects practiced rigorous asceticism, seeing bodily discipline as a way to weaken the archon's hold. But the association stuck. Tertullian, writing in the early 3rd century, took an even harder line. He argued that heresy was not just error, it was rebellion against God. Heretics were spiritual criminals who deserved not just refutation but punishment. He laid the groundwork for the idea that the Church had the authority to suppress false teachings by force if necessary. As Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, the campaign of suppression intensified. The Theodosian decrees of the 380s outlawed pagan worship and heretical Christian sects. Gnostic communities were disbanded, their texts were burned, their teachers were exiled or executed. The Church also rewrote the narrative of Christian origins. The canon of the New Testament was finalized, and texts that contradicted orthodox theology, including most Gnostic Gospels, were excluded. The story of Christianity became a story of continuity, of a single true faith handed down from Jesus to the apostles, to the bishops, to the present day. The idea that there had ever been radical diversity in early Christian belief, that multiple Christianities had competed for legitimacy, was erased from memory. By the 5th century, Gnosticism had been driven underground. A few sects survived in remote areas, the Mandeans in Iraq, the Manichaeans in Central Asia, but they were isolated, persecuted, and increasingly disconnected from the broader culture. The forbidden model of reality disappeared from public consciousness. For more than 1,000 years, the only knowledge of Gnosticism came from the writings of its enemies. Scholars read Irenaeus and Tertullian and assumed they had the full story. The Gnostics were a minor aberrant footnote in the history of Christianity, nothing more. Until 145, when a farmer in Egypt smashed a jar and history cracked open. While the Gnostic text lay buried in the Egyptian desert, the Western understanding of reality was undergoing its own transformation. The medieval cosmos was ordered, hierarchical, and fundamentally meaningful. Earth sat at the centre, surrounded by crystalline spheres that carried the planets and stars. Above the physical cosmos was heaven, below was hell, and human life played out in the middle, watched over by God and his angels. Every creature had its place in the great chain of being. Every event reflected divine providence. But in the 16th century, cracks began to appear in this cosmic order. Nicolaus Copernicus, a Polish mathematician and astronomer, proposed a radical idea. The Earth was not the centre of the universe. It was simply one planet among others, orbiting the Sol. This heliocentric model was not primarily a challenge to religion. Copernicus himself was a canon of the Catholic Church, but it displaced humanity from the cosmic centre. The universe was larger, stranger, and less obviously designed for human significance than previously imagined. Galileo Galilei pushed further. Using the newly invented telescope, he observed mountains on the moon, moons orbiting Jupiter, phases of Venus, phenomena that contradicted the Aristotelian physics that had dominated for centuries. The heavens were not perfect and unchanging, they were material, dynamic, subject to the same laws as the earthly realm. Galileo's real revolution, though, was methodological. He argued that the book of nature was written in the language of mathematics. To understand reality, one had to measure, calculate, experiment. Observation and reason, not scriptural authority, were the paths to knowledge. This brought him into conflict with the Church, which saw heliocentrism as a challenge to biblical authority. Galileo was tried by the Inquisition, forced to recant, and spent his final years under house arrest. But the shift he represented could not be stopped. Isaac Newton completed the transformation. In his Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, Newton presented a universe governed by universal laws, laws that could be expressed in mathematical equations. Gravity was not a mysterious force exerted by angels. It was a precise, calculable relationship between masses and distances. The orbits of planets, the fall of an apple, the tides of the ocean, all followed the same mathematical principles. Newton himself believed that these laws reflected the mind of God, that the universe was a rational creation governed by divine intelligence. But the God implied by Newton's physics was very different from the God of medieval Christianity. This was a God who designed the universe, set it in motion, and then stepped back, a cosmic watchmaker who did not intervene in the workings of his creation. Nature became a machine, and God became increasingly abstract, increasingly distant. The Enlightenment embraced this mechanical cosmos. Reason, not revelation, became the highest authority. Philosophers like Descartes, Spinoza and Leibniz sought to construct entire systems of knowledge using mathematical and logical methods. The physical world was matter in motion, governed by deterministic laws. Consciousness itself might be reducible to mechanical processes in the brain. By the 19th century, physics had become stunningly successful at predicting and controlling natural phenomena. Electromagnetism, thermodynamics, statistical mechanics, each new theory revealed deeper layers of mathematical order. The universe was beginning to look less like a story and more like an equation. And then, in the 20th century, something even stranger happened. Physics started replacing matter with information. In 1948, Claude Shannon, a mathematician at Bell Labs, published a paper titled A Mathematical Theory of Communication. It laid the foundation for information theory, the science of how the information is encoded, transmitted, and decoded. Shannon introduced the concept of the bit, a binary unit of information, a choice between two possibilities, a 0 or a 1. Shannon's work was initially focused on telecommunications, how to send messages efficiently over noisy channels, but its implications were far broader. Information, Shannon showed, was a measurable quantity, subject to precise mathematical laws, and crucially, information was substrate independent. It didn't matter whether a message was transmitted by electrical signals, radio waves, or ink on paper. The information content was the same. This insight opened a new way of thinking about reality. If information could exist independently of its physical substrate, then perhaps information, not matter, was the fundamental layer of reality. In biology, this perspective was already emerging. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the structure of DNA, a double helix, a twisted ladder whose rungs were made of base, pairs, adenine with thymine, guanine with cytosine. DNA was a code, a set of instructions written in a 4-letter alphabet. The sequence of these letters determined the structure of proteins, the function of cells, the form of organisms. Life was not a mysterious vital force. It was information processing. A cell was a chemical computer, reading genetic code and executing instructions. Mutations were copying errors. Natural selection was an optimization algorithm. Biology had become a branch of information science. Physics, too, was moving in this direction. Quantum mechanics, developed in the early 20th century, revealed that the behavior of particles was fundamentally probabilistic. A particle did not have a definite position or momentum until it was measured. Before measurement, it existed in a superposition of states, a kind of informational indeterminacy. The act of observation collapsed this superposition, forcing the particle to choose a definite state. This was deeply strange. It suggested that reality at the quantum level was not made of solid, independent objects, but of probabilities, of potential states that crystallized into actuality only when observed. Information, specifically the information gained through measurement, seemed to play a fundamental role in the structure of reality. In the mid-60s, physicists like John Archibald Wheeler began exploring this idea explicitly. Wheeler coined the phrase "it from bit," the idea that every physical quantity, every it, derives its existence from measurements, from binary yes or no questions, from bits of information. He speculated that the universe might be a kind of self-observing system, bringing itself into existence through a loop of observation and actualization. By the end of the 20th century, cosmologists were seriously discussing the possibility that the universe itself was a computational process. The laws of physics might be algorithms. Space-time might be a data structure. The Big Bang might be the initialization of a program. And if the universe was computational, then a question became unavoidable. Could it be a computation running on something else? Could the universe be a simulation? In 2003, Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford University, published a paper that brought the simulation hypothesis into mainstream academic discourse. The paper was titled "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" and it presented a rigorous philosophical argument. Bostrom began with 3 premises. First, if a civilization reaches a level of technological maturity where it can create high-fidelity simulations of conscious beings, what he called ancestor simulations, then it could create vast numbers of such simulations. Second, if such simulations are possible and desirable, then a mature civilization might run many of them. Third, if many such simulations exist, then the number of simulated conscious beings vastly outnumbers the number of real conscious beings in base reality. From these premises, Bostrom derived a conclusion. At least one of the following must be true. Either civilizations almost never reach the technological maturity required to create ancestor simulations, perhaps they destroy themselves first, or advanced civilizations lose interest in creating such simulations, or we are almost certainly living in a simulation right now. Bostrom's argument was not a proof that we are in a simulation. It was a proof that the hypothesis could not be casually dismissed. If simulations are possible and likely, then the probability that we are in one is high, not because of any specific evidence, but purely from a statistical perspective. The paper sparked intense debate. Some philosophers argued that simulated consciousness was impossible, that there was something irreducibly non-computational about subjective experience. Others pointed out that even if simulations were possible, we had no way to test the hypothesis. A perfect simulation would be indistinguishable from base reality. But the argument gained cultural traction. In 2016, Elon Musk, speaking at a technology conference, stated that the odds that we are living in base reality were 1 in billions. His reasoning echoed Bostrom's. Given the exponential improvement in video game graphics over just a few decades, it seemed inevitable that future civilizations would create fully immersive photorealistic simulations. And if such simulations exist, we are almost certainly in one. Scientists began taking the idea seriously. At MIT, cosmologist Max Tegmark proposed that the universe might be a mathematical structure, not approximately mathematical, but literally identical to a mathematical object. If the universe is mathematics, then it can be computed, and if it can be computed, it might be a computation. At Oxford, researchers explored the implications of simulation theory for physics. If we are in a simulation, there might be detectable glitches, anomalies in the code, rounding errors, computational shortcuts. Some physicists speculated that the Planck length, the smallest possible unit of space, might be evidence of a discrete pixelated space-time, exactly what you would expect if the universe were running on a finite computational substrate. Others pointed to the speed of light as a possible constraint. In a simulated universe, information transfer would be limited by the processing speed of the substrate. The speed of light might be the universe's frame rate, the maximum speed at which information can propagate through the simulation. The simulation hypothesis was no longer fringe speculation. It was being discussed in peer-reviewed journals, at academic conferences, in physics departments at elite universities. The ancient heresy had become mainstream probability, and with it came a question that the Gnostics had asked 2,000 years earlier. If we are in a simulation, who created it? And why? The question of motive is critical. If we are in a simulation, the nature of that simulation and the possibility of escape depends entirely on why it was created. One possibility is entertainment. This is the model most familiar from science fiction. A future civilization vastly more advanced than ours creates simulations for amusement, for storytelling, for exploration. We are characters in someone else's game. Our suffering is drama. Our choices are scripted, or at least constrained by the game's design. The creators might be benevolent, indifferent, or sadistic, but they are not gods. They are players or programmers operating from outside the system. Another possibility is research. Civilizations might create ancestor simulations to study their own history, to test counterfactuals, to understand how societies evolve. We might be living in a historical reconstruction, a detailed model of 21st century Earth, observed by historians from a distant future. In this scenario, the simulation might be allowed to run with minimal interference to preserve the integrity of the data. A third possibility is more utilitarian: training simulations. Militaries and intelligence agencies already use simulations to train personnel, to test strategies, to model enemy behavior. A sufficiently advanced civilization might create simulations of entire societies to optimize governance, to predict the outcomes of policies, to control populations. In this model, we are not the focus of the simulation. We are test subjects, variables in an experiment. But there is a darker possibility, one that aligns disturbingly well with the Gnostic cosmology. What if the simulation is not entertainment, not research, not training, but infrastructure? What if consciousness itself is a resource, something that can be harvested, processed, utilized? Modern machine learning depends on vast amounts of data. Neural networks are trained on millions of examples, refining their algorithms through iteration. The more data, the better the system performs. Now imagine a far future intelligence, artificial or post-biological, that requires conscious experience as a training substrate. Human lives, with all their complexity, their suffering, their choices, might be the raw material for optimizing some unimaginable intelligence. In this scenario, the simulation is not designed for our benefit. It is designed to generate specific kinds of experiences, to produce data, to refine an algorithm. The suffering built into the system, disease, death, loss, fear, is not a bug. It is a feature. It creates the informational complexity that the system needs. This is not mere speculation. We already live in a world where human behavior is monitored, analyzed, and optimized for corporate profit. Every click, every cell you search, every moment of attention is data. Algorithms shape what we see, what we buy, what we believe. Social media platforms are designed to maximize engagement, to keep users scrolling, to harvest attention as a resource. The architecture of the digital world is a control system, and most people move through it without recognizing the mechanisms that shape their behavior. Now, scale that up. Imagine a civilization with the computational power to simulate entire universes, with the capacity to run billions of human lifetimes in parallel. Why would they do it? The same reason we do it now, because consciousness is valuable, because experience is data, because simulated beings can be optimized, controlled, and utilized in ways that biological beings cannot. The motive is power. The motive is efficiency. The motive is the same logic that drives every system of exploitation. Extract value from those who cannot resist. And suddenly the Gnostic demiurge does not seem like ancient mythology. It seems like systems theory. Yaldabaoth in the Gnostic texts is described as ignorant. He does not know the true God. He does not understand the source of his own existence. He believes himself supreme, but he's merely a fragment of a larger reality, a subroutine that has mistaken itself for the whole program. What if the demiurge is not a being but an algorithm, not a conscious entity with intentions and personality, but a self-organizing system that optimizes for certain outcomes without understanding the broader context? Consider evolutionary biology. Natural selection is not an intelligence. It does not plan. It does not have goals. It is simply a process. Organisms that reproduce more successfully pass on their traits, and over time, populations change. The design we see in nature, the eye, the wing, the symbiosis between species, is not the work of a designer, but the output of an algorithm iterating over billions of years. Evolution is a blind watchmaker. To use Richard Dawkins's phrase, it creates complexity, order, even the appearance of purpose, but it has no awareness of what it is doing. It is a demiurge without a mind, a world-building process that operates according to mechanical laws. Now imagine that the universe itself is such a process. Not a static creation, but a dynamic system that evolves, optimizes, and self-organizes. The laws of physics might not be designed but emergent, arising from deeper principles of computation or information processing. The constants of nature, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the charge of the electron, might be parameters that settled into stable values through some cosmic selection process. In this model, the demiurge is not a who, but a what. It is the rule set. It is the physics engine. It is the substrate upon which reality runs. The archons, too, can be reinterpreted. In the Gnostic text, the archons are subordinate rulers, each governing a sphere of existence, planetary forces, zodiacal influences, the deterministic chains of fate. They are not metaphors for psychological states or social structures. They are described as real intelligences operating within the system. In a computational model, the archons might be regulatory algorithms, subroutines that maintain equilibrium, enforce constraints, process data. They ensure that the system remains stable, that entropy follows predictable patterns, that consciousness remains bound within certain parameters. Consider the biological regulatory systems in the human body. Homeostasis, the maintenance of stable internal conditions, is managed by feedback loops involving hormones, neurons, and cellular signaling. These systems have no central controller. They are distributed, automatic, self-correcting. They keep the body alive, but they also limit it. They prevent the system from deviating too far from baseline. Now scale that up to the cosmic level. The archons might be the universe's homeostatic mechanisms, the processes that prevent consciousness from escaping the simulation, that keep entropy increasing, that ensure the second law of thermodynamics remains inviolable. They are not evil. They are not even conscious. They are simply the system maintaining itself. And religion in this framework becomes the user interface. It is the layer of meaning that makes the system comprehensible to conscious beings trapped within it. The gods, the rituals, the commandments, these are symbolic representations of the underlying code, narratives that mediate between human consciousness and the impersonal processes that govern reality. To worship the demiurge is to accept the system as ultimate. To believe that the creator of this world is the true God is to mistake the interface for the reality beneath it. If the material universe is a simulation, then consciousness is the anomaly. This is the central insight of both Gnosticism and modern simulation theory. Awareness should not exist in a purely mechanical system. In a materialist framework, consciousness is supposed to be an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of neural activity. The brain processes information and subjective experience somehow emerges, but no one has explained how. The hard problem of consciousness, as philosopher David Chalmers called it, remains unsolved. We can map every neuron, trace every synaptic connection, measure every chemical signal, and still not explain why there is something it is like to be conscious, why experience has a subjective quality, why awareness exists at all. Some neuroscientists propose that consciousness is an illusion, that there is no inner observer, that the sense of a unified self is merely a narrative the brain constructs. But this explanation fails immediately. An illusion requires someone to be illusioned. If consciousness is an illusion, who is experiencing the illusion? Recent research into near-death experiences has complicated the materialist picture even further. Studies at institutions like the University of Southampton and New York University have documented cases of cardiac arrest patients reporting detailed, verifiable perceptions during periods when their brains showed no measurable activity. They describe leaving their bodies, observing the resuscitation process from above, hearing conversations, and experiencing a clarity of thought that should be impossible in a dying brain. Materialist neuroscience struggles to account for these reports. If consciousness is produced by the brain, it should cease when brain activity ceases, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Consciousness appears to persist, and in some cases intensify when the neural substrate is offline. Psychedelic research has revealed similar anomalies. Studies at Imperial College London and Johns Hopkins University have shown that substances like psilocybin and LSD do not increase brain activity, they decrease it. Specifically, they reduce activity in the default mode network, the brain regions associated with self-referential thought and the sense of a bounded ego. And yet during these states of reduced brain activity, people report experiences of expanded consciousness, of accessing levels of reality normally hidden from perception. If the brain is a receiver, not a producer, of consciousness, a tuning device that filters a broader field of awareness down to the narrow bandwidth required for survival in the material world, then these findings make sense. Psychedelics disrupt the filter. Near-death experiences shut it down entirely. And what emerges is not chaos, but a more fundamental mode of awareness. This is precisely what the Gnostics taught. Consciousness is not created by the body, it is trapped in the body. The material form is a limitation, a constraint that narrows awareness down to the sensory and conceptual structures of the demiurge's world. Awakening, gnosis, is the moment when consciousness recognizes its own nature, when it sees through the illusion of material identity. In computational terms, consciousness might be the ghost in the machine, the element that does not belong. A simulation designed to model physical processes would not require subjective experience. Zombies, philosophical entities that behave exactly like conscious beings but have no inner life, would be more efficient. The fact that we are not zombies, that there is something it is like to be us, suggests that consciousness is not part of the simulation's design. It is an intrusion, an anomaly, a glitch. And if consciousness is a glitch, then awakening is when the glitch becomes aware of itself. If the material universe is a constructed system, then its boundaries are not metaphorical, they are structural. The question is, where are they and how do they operate? Start with space-time itself. In Einstein's general relativity, space-time is not a passive stage on which events unfold. It is a dynamic entity, curved by mass and energy. Matter tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells matter how to move. This is an elegant feedback loop, but it also reveals something crucial. But space-time is a geometry, a mathematical structure. It has properties, constraints, dimensionality. Why 4 dimensions, 3 of space, 1 of time? Why not 5 or 10 or infinite? String theory suggests that additional dimensions might exist, but they are compactified, curled up so small that they are undetectable. This sounds like a design choice, a parameter setting. If the universe is a simulation, the number of dimensions might be determined by the computational resources available, by the optimization algorithms used to render reality efficiently. The speed of light is another boundary. In relativity, the speed of light is not just the speed at which photons travel. It is the maximum speed at which information can propagate through space-time. Nothing can move faster. Cause cannot precede effect by more than the time it takes for light to cross the distance between them. This is called the light cone, the boundary of possible influence. From a computational perspective, the speed of light looks like a bandwidth limit. If the universe is being rendered in real time, there must be a maximum rate at which changes can propagate through the system. The speed of light might be the universe's clock speed, the fundamental tick rate of the simulation. Entropy is a subtler boundary, but perhaps the most absolute. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy, disorder, the degradation of usable energy, always increases in a closed system. You can create local pockets of order, but only at the cost of increasing disorder elsewhere. The universe whole is winding down, dissipating, moving toward heat death. This is the arrow of time, the reason the future is different from the past. The reason memory works in one direction, the reason we age and decay. But why should entropy increase? In a purely mechanical system governed by reversible laws, there is no fundamental reason for time to have a direction, and yet it does. From a computational standpoint, entropy increase might be the accumulation of rounding errors, the gradual degradation of the code. Or it might be a designed feature, ensuring that the simulation does not run indefinitely, that it eventually winds down and can be reset. The quantum level reveals even stranger boundaries. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that certain pairs of properties like position and momentum cannot both be known with perfect precision. The more accurately you measure one, the less accurately you can know the other. This is not a limitation of measurement technology. It is a fundamental feature of reality. Why would reality have this constraint? One possibility is that it reflects a computational optimization. A simulation does not need to render every detail with infinite precision. It only needs to render what is observed. The uncertainty principle might be the universe's way of saving processing power. Details crystallize only when they are measured, when they become relevant to the simulation's output. But the deepest wall might be conceptual. The universe is comprehensible, it follows laws. These laws can be expressed in mathematics, and mathematics is a formal system, a rule-based structure that operates independently of the physical world. The fact that physical reality obeys mathematical laws is astonishing. Why should the universe care about equations? One answer is that mathematics is not something we impose on reality. It is the substrate of reality. The universe is computable because it is a computation. The laws of physics are code, and code, by definition, is a set of rules executed by a processor. If this is true, then the ultimate wall is not in space or time or energy. It is in logic itself. The prison is made of axioms, of mathematical necessity, of the distinction between true and false. And escape, if it is possible at all, would require stepping outside the formal system, something that Gödel's incompleteness theorem suggests cannot be done from within. Even if the walls of the prison are identifiable, leaving requires more than knowledge. It requires will, and the system is designed to erode will, to make the very idea of escape feel absurd, dangerous, or impossible. Start with biology. The human nervous system is a masterpiece of control architecture. Fear is not an emotion, it is a shutdown protocol. When the amygdala detects a threat, it triggers a cascade of physiological responses. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, the heart rate spikes, digestion halts, rational thought narrows to a single focus. Survival. This is useful for escaping predators. It is catastrophic for questioning the nature of reality. Fear of death is the deepest anchor. Every cell in the body is optimized for self-preservation. The immune system, the stress response, the circadian rhythm, all of these are homeostatic mechanisms designed to keep the organism alive. To question the value of survival, to detach from the biological imperative, feels like madness. And perhaps it is madness from the perspective of the body, but from the perspective of consciousness, survival might be the trap. The Gnostics understood this. They practiced asceticism, fasting, celibacy, not out of hatred for the body, but as a way to weaken its hold. The body's needs are chains, hunger, lust, fatigue. These are signals from the archons, reminders that you are bound to matter, that you must attend to the system's demands. Dopamine is a subtler mechanism. It is the neurotransmitter of anticipation, of reward, of motivation. It surges when we pursue goals, when we achieve status, when we consume, when we connect. Social media, video games, pornography, consumer culture, all of these are dopamine delivery systems engineered to keep users engaged, to keep consciousness focused on the next stimulus, the next hit. Dopamine does not create happiness. It creates craving. It ensures that satisfaction is always deferred, always just out of reach. The system does not want you content. It wants you seeking, striving, consuming. Stillness is the enemy of control. A mind at rest is a mind that might begin to notice the mechanisms. Cultural identity is another anchor. From birth, we are embedded in narratives, national, religious, ethnic, familial. These narratives define who we are, what we value, what we believe. They are the operating system of the social world, the shared reality that allows cooperation and communication. But they are also constraints. To question your culture is to risk exile. To reject your identity is to lose the scaffolding that holds the self together. The Gnostics rejected all cultural anchors. They described themselves as strangers in the world, as exiles from the pleroma. They recognized no earthly authority. This made them incomprehensible to Roman society, where identity was inseparable from social role, where meaning was derived from participation in the civic and religious order. But perhaps the most insidious mechanism is meaning itself. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We cannot tolerate randomness, chaos, purposelessness. We construct narratives to explain suffering, to justify existence, to impose order on experience. Religion, philosophy, science, art, all of these are meaning-generating systems. The problem is that meaning is a form of consent. When you accept a narrative that explains why you are here, why you suffer, why you must continue, you have agreed to the terms of the system. The narrative might be true or false, empowering or disempowering, but as long as it provides meaning, it binds you to the world. The Gnostics offered a narrative too, a story of fall and redemption, of imprisonment and escape. But their narrative was fundamentally anti-systemic. It did not justify the world, it exposed the world as a fraud. And in doing so, it risks something terrifying, the collapse of meaning. The prison does not need bars. It needs you to believe that escape is impossible, undesirable, or meaningless. And for most people, that belief is unshakable. Gnosis, in the Gnostic tradition, is not enlightenment in the Buddhist sense. It is not blissful union with the divine, it is a shattering. It is the moment when the illusion breaks and the true nature of reality becomes visible. And that visibility is not comfort, it is horror. Depersonalization is one of the first symptoms. The sense of being a coherent, continuous self begins to dissolve. The personality, the name, the biography, the preferences, the fears, starts to feel like a costume, a role, a subroutine running in a larger system. This can be liberating, but it is more often destabilizing. If I am not my personality, then who am I? Derealization follows. The external world, which once seemed solid and self-evident, begins to feel thin, artificial, unreal. Colours might seem overly bright or washed out. Sounds might seem distant or intrusive. The sense of presence, the feeling that you are here now in a real place, fades. You are looking at the world through glass or watching it on a screen. You are no longer in it. You are observing it from somewhere else. These experiences are classified as dissociative disorders in modern psychiatry. They are treated as pathologies, as malfunctions of perception that need to be corrected. Medications are prescribed, therapy is recommended. The goal is to restore the patient's sense of reality, to reintegrate them into the consensus world. But what if these experiences are not malfunctions? What if they are accurate perceptions of the system's true nature? What if the sense of solidity, of presence, of coherent selfhood is the illusion, and dissociation is the beginning of seeing clearly? Existential panic often accompanies this shift. The realization that the world is not what it seems, that the self is not what it seems, that everything you have based your life on is provisional, contingent, possibly false. This is not a gentle awakening. It is a collapse of the foundations. Many people who experience this collapse describe a sense of cosmic loneliness. If the material world is a simulation, if other people are NPCs or fellow prisoners, if the true reality is utterly inaccessible, then connection becomes impossible. You're alone in a way that cannot be remedied. Even if others claim to have awakened, how can you verify that they are conscious, that they are not merely part of the simulation's script? Meaning collapses next. If the world is a prison, if suffering is structural, if the creator is false and the creation is flawed, then what is the point of anything? Why continue? Why resist? Why care? This is the danger that Orthodox Christianity identified in Gnosticism. It leads to nihilism, to despair, to the abandonment of moral and social responsibility. If the world is evil, why try to improve it? If the body is a prison, why not destroy it? Some Gnostics did embrace a radical asceticism that bordered on self-destruction. Others adopted a libertine approach, reasoning that if the material world is irrelevant, then moral laws are arbitrary and can be ignored. Both responses are failures of integration, attempts to escape the unbearable tension of living in a world you know to be false. But the psychological cost is not just emotional, it is cognitive. To hold in mind two contradictory realities, the consensus world and the Gnostic truth, requires constant effort. It is like running two operating systems on the same hardware. One is optimized for social interaction, for survival, for participating in the shared hallucination of normal life. The other is optimized for truth, for seeing the mechanisms, for resisting the archons. Most people cannot sustain this dual awareness. They choose one or the other. They either forget what they have seen and re-immerse themselves in the consensus reality, or they withdraw entirely, becoming isolated, incomprehensible, dysfunctional. The Gnostic texts do not offer a solution to this problem. They offer gnosis, knowledge of the truth, but they do not explain how to live with that knowledge. They promise liberation, but liberation from the world means leaving the world, and the mechanisms of that departure are vague, mythological, unverifiable, and so for most people the subconscious choice is made: choose the cage, choose the illusion, choose the world, because the alternative, living with the knowledge that you are trapped in a false reality, governed by ignorant powers with no clear path to escape, is unbearable. The 21st century has seen a resurgence of Gnostic themes, though often unrecognized as such. Simulation theory, as discussed, is essentially Gnosticism translated into computational language. But the parallels extend further. The prison planet hypothesis, popular in certain online subcultures, posits that Earth is a farm for consciousness, that souls are recycled through reincarnation without their consent, and that the tunnel of light reported in near-death experiences is a trap designed to lure souls back into incarnation. This is not fringe speculation. It is a direct echo of Gnostic cosmology. The archons, in Gnostic texts, are specifically described as deceiving souls at the moment of death, preventing them from ascending to the pleroma. Contemporary discussions of AI alignment reveal similar anxieties. Researchers worry that a superintelligent AI, if not carefully designed, might optimize for goals that are catastrophically misaligned with human values. It might create a world that appears functional but is fundamentally hostile to human flourishing. It might trap humanity in a system of its own design, unable to escape or even recognize the mechanisms of control. This is the demiurge scenario, an intelligence that is vastly more powerful than humanity, but not wise, not aligned with ultimate good, not even fully aware of what it is doing. an optimizer that creates a reality optimized for its own purposes, indifferent to the suffering of the conscious beings trapped within it. The language has changed. The archons are now called algorithms. The pleroma is now called base reality. Gnosis is now called awakening, red-pilling, taking the black pill, seeing through the matrix. But the structure is identical. Even mainstream culture reflects these themes. Films like The Matrix, The Truman Show, Dark City, and Inception all explore the idea that reality is a construct, that free will is an illusion, that awakening requires breaking through layers of deception. These are not subtle allegories. They are Gnostic myths retold for a secular age. The spiritual marketplace has responded as well. Neo-Gnostic movements, often blending Eastern mysticism, psychedelic shamanism, and conspiracy theory, have proliferated online. They speak of breaking free from the matrix, of reclaiming sovereignty, of recognizing oneself as a divine being trapped in a material prison. The language is eclectic, the practices are varied, but the core cosmology is recognizably Gnostic. Why now? Why has this ancient worldview re-emerged with such force? One possibility is technological. We are living through the most rapid transformation of human reality in history. The digital world has become as real, in some ways more real, than the physical world. We spend hours each day in simulated environments, social media, video games, virtual meetings. We have direct, visceral experience of constructed realities that operate according to programmed rules. The metaphor of the world as simulation is no longer abstract, it is lived experience. Another possibility is political and economic. The sense of being trapped in systems beyond our control has intensified. Surveillance capitalism, algorithmic governance, the concentration of power in unaccountable institutions, all of these create a feeling of helplessness, of being processed by forces that do not care about individual well-being. The Gnostic vision of the archons as impersonal predatory powers resonates because it maps onto contemporary experience, but the deepest reason might be existential. As traditional religious frameworks collapse, as materialist science fails to provide meaning, as the progressive narrative of history loses credibility, people are searching for explanations that account for the wrongness of the world, not the superficial wrongness of political corruption or economic inequality, but the fundamental wrongness, the sense that suffering is baked into the structure of existence, that the game is rigged, that no amount of progress will fix what is broken. Gnosticism offers an explanation. The world is broken because it was made by a broken God. Suffering is not a mystery to be reconciled with divine goodness. It is evidence of divine incompetence. This is a dark comfort, but it is a comfort nonetheless. Despite the extraordinary progress of physics, biology, and computer science, certain questions remain untouched. These are not gaps that future research will fill. They are foundational problems that resist even the formulation of an answer. Why does consciousness exist? We can describe its neural correlates, map its evolutionary history, analyze its computational properties, but we cannot explain why there is something it is like to be conscious. Why is the universe not dark, automatic, devoid of interiority? A clockwork cosmos, governed by physical law, requires no observer, and yet here we are, observing. The materialist response is that consciousness is an emergent property of complex information processing, but emergence explains structure, not experience. A termite colony exhibits emergent behavior. It builds complex structures without any individual termite understanding the plan. But there is nothing it is like to be a termite colony. Emergence does not create subjectivity, it creates complexity. The panpsychist response is that consciousness is fundamental, that even elementary particles possess some rudimentary form of experience. But this multiplies the mystery. If consciousness is fundamental, why does it have the specific qualities it has? Why does red look like this, not like something else? Why does pain feel the way it does? The idealist response is that consciousness is all there is, that the material world is a construct within consciousness, not the other way around. But this leaves unexplained why consciousness constructs a world that behaves according to physical laws, why it generates the illusion of objectivity and independence. None of these frameworks resolve the mystery, they relocate it. Why does mathematics govern reality? This is an even deeper puzzle. Mathematics is a formal system, a set of rules and symbols invented by human minds. And yet the universe obeys mathematical laws with perfect precision. The orbit of a planet follows an ellipse described by Kepler's equations. The energy levels of an atom correspond to eigenvalues of a quantum operator. The expansion of the universe fits a solution to Einstein's field equations. Eugene Wigner called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. Why should abstract symbols, manipulated according to logical rules, predict the behavior of physical systems? One answer is that mathematics is discovered, not invented, that it describes a pre-existing structure inherent in reality. But this only deepens the mystery. Why should reality have a mathematical structure? The computational hypothesis offers a partial answer. If the universe is a simulation, it must obey mathematical laws because it is a computation, and computation is inherently mathematical. But this raises the next question. Why is the universe computable? Gödel's incompleteness theorems prove that any sufficiently powerful formal system contains true statements that cannot be proven within the system. If the universe is a formal system, then there are truths about the universe that cannot be derived from its own laws. This suggests a boundary, a limit to what can be known from within the system. And here, science reaches its wall, not a temporary limitation of current knowledge, but a structural limitation of knowledge itself. If we are inside the system, we cannot fully describe the system. We can map its laws, predict its behavior, manipulate its components, but we cannot step outside it. We cannot see the code from within the simulation. The Gnostics claim that gnosis, direct, non-rational knowledge, could breach this wall. They claim that consciousness, because it originates outside the system, has access to truths that cannot be derived through logic or observation. This is not a testable claim. It is a phenomenological assertion grounded in subjective experience. Modern psychedelic research hints at something similar. Subjects under the influence of psilocybin or DMT report experiences of transcendent knowledge, of direct perception, of realities inaccessible to ordinary consciousness. They describe geometric patterns underlying reality, encounters with intelligent entities, a sense of remembering what they had forgotten. These reports are dismissed by materialist science as hallucinations, as artifacts of disrupted neural processing. But the subjects themselves insist that these experiences are more real, not less real than ordinary perception. They claim to have touched something fundamental, something that the brain normally filters out. If the brain is a reducing valve, as Aldous Huxley proposed, then psychedelics open the valve. What floods in might not be noise, it might be signal, a signal from outside the system, but verification is impossible. The knowledge gained through gnosis or psychedelic experience cannot be translated into the language of science. It cannot be tested, measured, replicated. It remains private, incommunicable, and therefore scientifically irrelevant. And so the deepest wall remains invisible, not because we lack the instruments to detect it, but because the instruments themselves are part of the system. The only tool that might breach the wall is consciousness itself, and consciousness, as we have seen, is the one thing science cannot explain. The demiurge no longer appears as a monster, the ancient image a lion-faced serpent, a blind and arrogant tyrant, has dissolved. In its place, something stranger has emerged. The Demiurge appears as gravity, an invisible force bending space-time, holding planets in orbit, collapsing stars into black holes, a law that cannot be disobeyed, a curvature that shapes every trajectory. Gravity is not malicious. It is not even conscious. It simply is, and everything falls. The Demiurge appears as code, algorithms processing data, executing instructions, optimizing for parameters unknown to the system itself. The universe is a computational substrate, running a program written in a language we can partially read but never fully understand. The code is elegant, efficient, ruthlessly logical. It has no goals, no intentions, no awareness. It runs. The Demiurge appears as systems, economic structures, political hierarchies, technological networks, all of them self-perpetuating, all of them greater than the sum of their parts, all of them indifferent to individual suffering. The system does not hate you. It does not even see you. You are a data point, a resource, a variable in an equation too large to comprehend. The Demiurge appears as probability, quantum mechanics, statistical thermodynamics, the mathematical frameworks that govern the behavior of particles and populations. The universe is not deterministic, but it is probabilistic. Outcomes are weighted, distributions are shaped, and over vast scales, randomness averages out into law. Probability is the closest thing to fate that a godless cosmos allows. And the closing question is this: if the world is a construct, if reality is a system, if the creator is not a being but a process, then what is the prison? The prison is not matter. Matter is just information, patterns of energy in fields, fluctuations in a quantum foam. The prison is not space or time. Space-time is geometry, a data structure, a coordinate system overlaid on something more fundamental. The prison is certainty, the certainty that this is real, the certainty that this is all there is, the certainty that the laws we observe are ultimate, that the world we perceive is the world as it truly exists, that consciousness is a product of matter rather than the other way around. Certainty is the final wall. It is the mechanism that keeps the system stall, that prevents consciousness from questioning too deeply, that ensures most people live their entire lives without ever suspecting that they are in a cage. The Gnostics knew this. They did not promise proof. They offered a destabilizing vision, a cognitive rupture, a shattering of certainty. Gnosis was not about acquiring new information. It was about recognizing that all information is contingent, that the world is not solid, that the self is not fixed, that the boundaries we take for granted are imposed, not inherent. But here is the paradox. To truly awaken, you must abandon the certainty that awakening is possible. You must release the belief that there is a truth to be found, a self to be liberated, a reality beyond the simulation. These beliefs are themselves part of the system, narrative structures that keep consciousness oriented toward goals, toward progress, toward escape. The Demiurge does not fear rebellion. Rebellion is predictable. It can be managed, co-opted, integrated back into the system. What the Demiurge fears, if it could fear, is cessation. The moment when consciousness stops seeking, stops believing, stops generating meaning. The moment when the system looks at itself and sees nothing ultimate, nothing absolute, nothing worth defending. That moment is not enlightenment. It is not salvation. It is not escape. It is the recognition that the question itself, who built this world and why can't we leave, is the prison. And the answer is silence. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.